What if you could avoid playing wrong notes forever? That's what I'm going to teach you to do in today's video, so let's go and get started. Hey, what's going on? Jonah Fox here. So today, I'm going to show you 4 different strategies that you can follow to avoid hitting wrong notes when you play. So let's say you're playing over a backing track and you play a note that sounds sour. What do you do in that situation, and how do you avoid getting into that situation in the first place? That's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to show you 4 strategies that you can follow, and then I'll give you a full demo so you can hear all of these strategies working in action. So if you understand what I'm teaching in this video, you're never going to hit a wrong note again because you're going to know exactly what to do. So let's establish what a wrong note is. So when we are playing harmonica over music, what we're really doing is we're playing notes over a chord progression. And, this is somewhat like math. Some of those notes are going to work over the chords that we're playing over, and some of them are just not. So what we have to do is understand, first of all, what notes work and what notes don't work, and then identify some strategies to deal with notes that don't work. Because you're probably already familiar with it, let's go look at the chord progression of the blues. So we have 3 chords, 1, 4, and 5. So let's assume that we're playing on a C harmonica. These would be the chords G, C, and D. These chords are made up of multiple notes. So G is made up of G, B, and D. C is C, E, and G. And D is D, F sharp, and A. We call the note that the chord is named after the root note, and the other 2 notes are called chord tones. Just to simplify, really all 3 of these notes are chord tones. So sometime if I say chord tones later on in this video, I really just mean any of the notes that are part of the chord, so like G, B, or D. Sometimes chords are just 3 notes like this, and sometimes they're only 2 notes. Other times, they're quite complex. As an example, in the blues, it's very common to have like a G7 chord, which you would add an extra note. So it would be G, B, D, and F. Okay, so I just want you to understand that the 3 notes is like the most basic version, but often we're going to be more complex than that. So here's the deal. When you're improvising, you're going to play phrases. This is just a collection of notes that you string together. Most people don't really pay attention to the notes that are in the middle of your phrases because you move through them really quickly. People focus on the beginning or the end. So when I played that phrase right there, people really focus on the first note. They don't pay attention to the middle ones. And they really pay attention to the last one. Okay, so we're focusing on the beginning and the end. And to keep this easy, let's call those notes at the beginning and the end anchor notes. So here's the secret sauce. If you want to sound good, like you're harmonizing properly over the music all the time and it just sounds pleasant and nice, you're going to want to match up the anchor notes of your phrase to the notes that are in the chord. So as an example, you would want to either start and or end your phrases on a G if you're playing in a G chord, and alternatively you can also end on the other chord tones like the B or the D. If you're playing over a more complex chord like let's say a G7, you could also potentially start or end your phrases on the F because that's a note in the chord as well. I know that this gets complex, so let's look at a practical example. Let's say we're playing a blues song. For the majority of the blues, it's going to be a G chord, right? It goes G, 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 C, C, G, G, D, C, G, D. There's a lot of G's in there, okay? And so when you're playing over that G chord and you want it to sound nice and not sound wrong, then you would want to anchor your phrases around the notes in the G chord, the G, the B, or the D. And if it's a G7, you could also potentially use an F, but it's less strong. So if I use G as my anchor note, it's going to sound the most stable. So I want to show this to you. I'm going to play over a chord drone, and I am going to show you how starting and ending my phrases on the G really works. So check that out. All right, so I have a G chord drone, which means we have the notes G, B, and D, and they're being stretched out for a long time, which is what the drone part means. So what I'm going to do, just to make it really clear, I'm going to start and end my phrases on the note G. It's just so you can hear how that sounds really nice. Here we go. So you can hear how stable it is when we play that G as our anchor note. So playing that root note works, and so do the other notes to a lesser extent, like the D and the B. So let's hear what that sounds like. All right, now I want to show you what it's like to make either the B or the D, the other chord tones, as your anchor notes. And just to make this really straightforward, let's just focus on the note that we're ending our phrases on. So I'm going to start my note, wherever on the B, the D, maybe the G, maybe something else. And I'm going to end my phrases on a B or a D. Check it out. That's the D. That's the B. That's the B. That's the D. So you can hear that those notes work really well. So what happens when you anchor your phrases around a note that's not in the chord? Well, there's actually two situations here. We have scale harmonies and dissonant harmonies. Here's what I mean by scale harmonies. This is where you harmonize using a note that's in the scale, but not the chord. So let's say we're playing in the key of G, and the note A, which is 3 whole step draw bend or 6 draw. Okay. That's a note that's in the G major scale and the G major pentatonic scale, but it's not in the G chord. So it's not going to match up perfectly, but it's also not going to sound awful either. Let's take a listen to that. So now I'm going to give you an example of a scale tone harmony, and this means I'm going to end my phrases on a note that is not part of the scale. So this time around, I'm going to focus on ending my phrases on the note A. Check it out. It's like it doesn't sound awful, but it also doesn't sound great either. It just feels like it wants to keep going, right? It wants to keep moving on. So that's one of the scale harmonies. Let's pick a different one. We'll choose E, which is 2 blow or 5 blow, and I'm going to end my phrases on that note. I'm not really sure. Just like the A, it wants to keep moving, right? It adds a little bit of a crunch in there. It's a little, makes you a little uncomfortable. It adds what we call tension, right? So you can hear by the demo, when we play the A over the G chord, it's not a great sound. It makes us a little uncomfortable, but it's not quite nails on a chalkboard. Now, you can consider this a wrong note, but it's not necessarily. Perspective is everything. When you harmonize with chord tones, like the G, the B, or the D, things are going to sound nice and happy. And when you harmonize with scale tones, the notes that are in the scale but not the chord, we're going to get this feeling of tension. I'm not going to go into the idea of tension fully today, but tension isn't a bad thing. It's a particular lever that you can pull for a certain emotional effect. I want you to reframe things. If you land on a note that's in the scale, but it's not in the chord, like let's say an A or an E, it's not a wrong note. It just adds tension. There are some notes that really do sound wrong, however, and these are notes that are not in the chord or the scale. These are called dissonant notes. It's a dissonant harmony. So as an example, the note G sharp, so let's do that, a 6 half step draw bend, is going to sound really ugly when played over a G chord. Take a listen to that. All right, now let's talk about that G sharp, that dissonant note here. Sounds really bad, right? It's hard to even end up there if you folks are playing around the scales, but if you do end up there, it's going to sound like nails on a chalkboard. There's not that many truly dissonant notes, so this isn't something that comes up all the time. I just want you to understand that these are the notes that are actually truly bad, and you should probably do something to fix them. Okay, so with that in mind, here's what you're going to do about those actually wrong notes, those dissonant notes. I'm going to explain things and then I'll show you a full demo afterwards. So the first strategy is to just not encounter this problem at all when you play by staying within a scale. You know, I'm big on scales on this channel, and there's a reason, because it is the cheat code for making your music sound pretty decent. All of the notes that you're playing are in the scale, so you won't be hitting any of those dissonant notes that are truly wrong. By chance, you may end up playing or anchoring your phrases around a chord tone or a scale tone. So when you end on a chord tone, a note that's in the chord, things are going to sound good. And when you end on a scale tone, you're going to feel a sense of tension. This is not wrong, okay? It's just another emotional tool that you can use. So if you want to learn your scales, I have a free resource that you can check out called the Scale Cheat Sheet. The link's down below in the description. Using the Scale Cheat Sheet, you're going to get all of the tabs for the scales that you can play. And if you stay within a scale, you're really not going to play wrong notes. At worst, you're going to play a scale harmony, a scale tone, and this isn't bad, it just creates tension, but you still may not like it. So what do? Well, the first answer is to just move on. If you play a note that doesn't sound good at the end of your phrase or even at the start of your phrase, you just move away from it and move to another note in your scale, okay? Very simple. So if you play, let's say, a phrase that ends on the A, all you're going to do is just move on. That's it. It's really, really basic, and I'll show you how this works out a little bit later. So the next option of dealing with a mistake is really about playing those dissonant notes, the notes that are not in the scale or the chord. So if you end up screwing up and landing on a note that really sounds terrible, there's an easy fix. You just bend up or down. If you bend your note really quickly, you're going to move to a note that works. I got this trick from an incredible bassist, guy named Victor Wooten, and he pitches it like this. In music, there are 12 notes, okay? There's 12 notes of the chromatic scale. And in a scale, like a major scale or one of the minor scales, we have 7 notes. And so that means at any given time, there's only 5 notes that truly don't work. And so if you happen to be unfortunate enough to land on one of those notes, there's an easy fix. You just move it a half step up or a half step down. And the easy way to do that on harmonica is by bending, okay? So if you land on one of those notes, if one of those notes is your anchor note there and you're like, ooh, that sounds terrible, you just bend up or bend down, and it's really simple, okay? If you develop this as a habit, you're really just not going to play wrong notes anymore because you're just going to course correct as you go. The final strategy is one you might use less often, but it still works. It's still very effective. And that is repeating your mistake over and over again. If you do this, let's say you end on one of those dissonant notes and you really, really don't like it, you don't like the sound of it. If you keep repeating it, the sound starts to normalize in your mind, and it doesn't really sound like a mistake anymore. It just sounds like some, chromatic character that you're adding to your playing. So if you play a wrong note, like let's say a scale tone, if you consider that wrong, or a truly dissonant note, if you repeat that idea a few times, it won't sound wrong anymore. So to review so far, when your notes sound good, you're playing a chord tone, either the root of the chord or the other 2 chord tones, or more if it's a bigger chord. When your notes sound bad, understand that there's 2 degrees of this. Scale harmonies, which is a note that you're anchoring on that is in the scale but not the chord, those aren't really wrong. They just add tension to your playing. And you do have to figure out how to deal with them, but it's not like truly a wrong note. Dissonant harmonies, the actual wrong notes, those can sound pretty gross, but there's only 5 notes out of the 12 that we can play that are truly wrong, truly dissonant. And as a general rule of thumb, if you just stay in the scale, it'll make it so you never play those dissonant notes. Now, if you do end up on a note that is really ugly, you have 4 options. First, you can just move on. It's no big deal, right? If you play a note that you don't like, just move to a note that you do like. And generally you can just go to the next note in the scale. Next, you can bend your note a half step down or potentially go from a blow note to a bent note. This would be moving your note a half step, which would make it match up with those 7 notes that work well because it's a note in the scale, right? Or finally, you could just repeat your mistake over and over again until it doesn't really sound like a mistake. It sounds like something you're intentionally doing. So there are strategies to fix wrong notes when you play them, but here's really the biggest thing. When you play a wrong note, the last thing you want to do is to like make a face and draw attention to the fact that you don't like the note that you landed on. It's just a dead giveaway that you don't know what you're doing and that you're an amateur. So part of this is controlling your emotions as well. If you play something that you don't like, handle it like a professional, take it in stride. I know it's one thing to hear about all of this, but I actually want to show you these different methods in action. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to put out a backing track and I'm going to demo these 4 strategies live and talk through it as I go. So let's jump into the demo. All right, so I went over these 4 strategies. The first one is just staying in a scale because your scale is made up of chord tones, either 3 or 4 notes, depending on the chord, and your scale tones, okay? And the scale tones aren't bad. They're not mistakes. I want you to actually pay attention to me. I'm not going to go like, ooh, when I play a bad note, right? I'm just going to accept that it's a scale tone. It's adding a little bit of tension, and then I'll just move on, okay? So here's the idea. I'm going to stick with the major pentatonic scale and just pay attention to the notes that I end on. I'll call them out if they're a chord tone or a scale tone so you can really hear the difference. Here we go. Staying in the major pentatonic. That was a D, a chord tone. Scale tone. There we go. Scale tone. Chord tone. Chord tone, chord tone, chord tone, chord tone. Now I'm going to focus on those scale tones a little bit more. Again, you see I didn't freak out as I did it, right? Now when I play those again, they add tension. They're not exactly wrong, but when I hear that, that's a trigger for me to keep moving on. It's like those notes, they feel unfinished. Like it just feels like it wants to keep going. So that's what I'm going to do. When I play one of those notes, I'm going to keep going. We're just going to move to the next note in the scale. That's the easiest way to think about this. Here we go. Scale tone, want to keep moving. Scale tone, want to keep moving. There you go. All right, so you can just move on. Staying in the scale will make it so you're only doing the chord tones and scale harmonies, which aren't bad, and then when you play a scale harmony, you just keep moving. Now, what if you end on some of those notes that are actually truly dissonant? Let's say the G sharp, okay, the 6 half-step draw bend. If you end on a note like that, that is dissonant, you're just going to either bend up or go back to the blow. So check it out. Scale tones, you want to keep moving. Down this time. All right, so this time again, I am going to keep focusing around that G sharp, that actual truly dissonant note. But this time I'm going to actually repeat it a couple times and normalize that sound, and it's going to sound less bad every time I do it. Right? I hope that this was helpful and that you learned something new. If you want to learn about other mistakes that you could be making with your harmonica playing, then you should watch this video up here. It could be a game changer for you. That's all for this week. I'll see you next time. Peace.